Welcome to Beyond the Buzz, where curiosity meets clarity. I'm Dr. Tara Moros, scientist and communicator with decades of experience translating complex human research into clear, evidence-informed insight. Today, we're talking about self-care and burnout. Self-care is often framed as personal responsibility. Burnout is often framed as personal failure. Burnout isn't just feeling stressed or tired. And yet, many of us are told that self-care is the solution, that if we just rest more, optimize better, or try harder, burnout should resolve. That message shows up everywhere, across roles, industries, and life contexts. But is that actually true? It sounds simple, but the science behind it is not. So let's take a closer look together, starting with what's driving the buzz. Self-care content is everywhere. On TikTok alone, the hashtag self-care has reached 28 billion views. That makes it one of the most visible wellness narratives online. At the same time, burnout is taking a measurable toll. Research estimates it costs employers between about $4,000 and $21,000 per employee each year, adding up to roughly $5 million annually for a typical 1,000-person company. Meanwhile, the global wellness economy keeps growing. From 2023 to 2024, it grew by almost 8%, reaching almost $7 trillion worldwide. Self-care products, apps, and routines are a major part of that growth. Together, these numbers send a powerful message. Burnout is widespread and costly, and the dominant response offered is more self-care. But popularity doesn't always mean clarity. Let's check the evidence, our kind of receipt check. This is the moment to pause and ask the questions that matter. What's the evidence? What's the source? And how do we know? Here's what the evidence shows. A 2020 overview of systematic reviews looked at interventions to reduce burnout in physicians and nurses. A systematic review analyzes all available research on a topic. This review found that individual-focused strategies, including self-care approaches, can reduce burnout symptoms. But the effects were often small and short-term, typically measured over weeks to a few months, rather than sustained over longer periods. Now, some context matters. Because burnout was first studied as an occupational health issue, most of the strongest evidence comes from research on doctors and nurses. Burnout-like exhaustion can also occur outside formal workplaces, including self-employed roles and unpaid caregiving, even though these contexts are harder to study systematically. So in this episode, the strongest receipt check comes from healthcare settings. A 2023 mapping review examined how nurses actually practice self-care. A mapping review gives a broad overview of how a topic has been studied. The authors found that nurses used many self-care strategies, but they also reported barriers like time pressure, workload, and lack of organizational support. A 2024 systematic review looked at physical activity and burnout risk in healthcare workers. The review found that physical activity was associated with a lower risk of burnout. Association means two things move together, not that one causes the other. The authors noted wide variation in how studies measured both exercise and burnout. Across studies, self-care is defined broadly, which limits how much research exists and how easily findings can be compared. That distinction matters when interpreting claims about self-care and burnout. It's also important to separate stress from burnout. Stress is often short-term and tied to specific pressures. When the pressure eases, energy and motivation usually return. Burnout tends to develop after prolonged, unresolved stress and shows up as ongoing exhaustion, emotional distance, or a sense that effort no longer makes a difference. Self-care practices are often presented as ways to cope with stress in the moment. But burnout is a different problem, and reducing stress is not the same as reducing burnout. That leads to a critical question. A 2024 systematic review asked whether self-care is sustainable without structural support. The authors found that self-care interventions worked better when workplaces, where they exist, also address staffing, workload, and leadership. Without those supports, benefits were harder to maintain. In practice, structural support can include things like realistic staffing levels, predictable schedules, or leadership norms that protect recovery time, rather than relying on individuals to compensate. Finally, a 2023 systematic review examined workplace interventions for healthcare professionals. This review found stronger and more lasting improvements when organizations changed systems, not just individual behavior. Examples included schedule control, staffing changes, and leadership engagement. Across these studies, a pattern appears. Self-care can help, but it does not work well in isolation and needs organizational change for meaningful improvement. So why does this trend resonate? Self-care offers something very appealing. It gives people a sense of control when stress or demands feel overwhelming. It's also easy to package, market, and share. Self-care messages are usually positive. They avoid blaming workplaces directly. And they fit neatly into short videos and simple checklists. But that appeal comes with a quieter emotional cost. When burnout is framed as a personal problem, people may feel pressure to fix themselves. That tension helps explain why self-care feels both comforting and frustrating. So what's the takeaway? Across multiple systematic reviews, based largely on studies of doctors and nurses, self-care strategies were found to help with burnout symptoms, but they weren't enough by themselves. Evidence consistently shows stronger and more lasting benefits when workplaces also change structures and supports. That difference matters when it comes to solutions. Many self-care practices, like rest, exercise, or brief time off, are commonly promoted as ways to cope with stress and restore a sense of balance. But when burnout is driven by ongoing demands without adequate support, those same strategies often bring only temporary relief. Self-care can feel helpful in the moment, but it cannot repair systems. What remains uncertain is how best to define, study, and scale self-care across settings. That uncertainty can feel confusing when self-care is presented as the only solution. Your evidence edit moment. When you hear advice about self-care and burnout, pause and ask one key question. Is the solution focused only on individual behavior, or does it include structural support? The evidence shows self-care works best when systems change too. Use that lens to decide what advice deserves your energy. You're not failing if self-care alone doesn't fix burnout. Something to reflect on. The next time you feel burnt out, what support, other than self-care, would actually make a difference? If you found this useful, follow Beyond the Buzz and share it with a friend who likes a little science with their scroll. You can also explore the full evidence and vote in the Clarity poll in the Evidence Edit. Until next time, stay curious and stay kind to your mind. This is Beyond the Buzz, cutting through the hype because evidence is empowering.